God bless everybody. Today it is April 24th of 2025, and I wanted to bring this video to your attention because we now have the death of the last Pope, Pope Francis, and how that might affect us into the last days or end days as we see a new Pope selected in the next few weeks. Usually this occurs fairly quickly once they bury the last pope, and there is a number of possibilities that link this to a potential false prophet. So when you go into Revelation 13, this chapter is broken into two parts. One, we have this beast of the sea rising in the first part of Revelation, and this is an Antichrist figure. But once you get down into the text here, you realize that there's a secondary figure that rises. This leader is a beast from the earth, and so he talks about these two leaders that are going to affect us in end days. This leader above, which is a beast of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns, reflecting the 10 Muslim nations are getting ready to be compelled to attack Israel and place them under judgment. It also talks about how this beast kingdom is set up of those 3 areas of the past in the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. In chapter 2 of Daniel, it talks about the leopard, the bear, and the lion, and how that these would affect the end days, and how they would also affect Antichrist and the false prophet as we move forward. Now, one thing I think is a little interesting here is this is actually an inversion of it in the statue, and I don't mean this a bad way. I'm just sort of thinking he's pointing us out something here. So he talks about the leopard being first here. Okay, where he's actually the 3rd kingdom going into the 4th kingdom in the statue of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So it's interesting that he'd bring the leopard up first, and this is actually the country of Turkey. The bear, or the Medes and the Persians, and the lion was Iraq of old, and those areas are the areas of the beast kingdom. So it's interesting, in my opinion, that he bring the leopard up first, which is actually where Antichrist comes from, which would be Turkey, which would be Erdogan as he dies in Daniel 8. It tells you clearly the goat's horn is broken, and then we get an Antichrist from that. So the question is, when he breaks the horn of the goat, does he mean that he kills Erdogan? And then if you look at Isaiah 14, he literally does a resurrectional event into a supernatural Antichrist figure, which is in my opinion, dead Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39, buried in a tomb, in a grave, as it indicates, and then rises in an Antichrist figure as we move forward into 2025, 2026. Talks about he's the dragon, that he will basically create blasphemies against the Most High. He will actually create war upon the saints. And so when people say that this Antichrist getting ready to come up is going to be a leader of peace, I don't really buy that. I think he's going to be an Islamic nightmare that brings pain upon not only the Jews and the Christians as they sign a treaty and a caliphate against the Jews and the Christians. So we have this first beast, and all of the people on earth shall worship him, and if they also take the mark of this beast, they are removed from the book of life, okay, and from the foundations of the world, and they're blotted out completely. So you need to understand what this first beast is. It clearly tells you that he will leadeth you into captivity and killeth you by the sword, and if you have the patience of the saints and understand what's getting ready to happen, you won't fall this dragon that's getting ready to come up. But this is a problem because there's a secondary leader here that brings literally fire from heaven down in the sight of men as a beast of the earth. So when you get into verse 11, there's a break here between verse 10 and 11. So the first half of this talks about Antichrist. Then when you get into verse 11, it talks about a secondary beast. So this chapter is broken into two sections. And that is extremely important as you get to the bottom of this chapter, because it's very revealing in what he says here. So he talks about this beast of the earth coming up with two horns like a lamb, and he speaks like the dragon. Okay, so what he's saying is it's going to be a religious leader, probably out of the papacy, because he's going to convert the Christians into Islamic ideology. We have to look at this new pope and determine what his ideology is and whether he will stay consistent with God's laws and rules that are the foundations of the book, or whether he will expound out like this last Pope did and be inclusive and all the other things that he did, which perverted the church into a place that we didn't really want it to go. So this false prophet will have the power of the first beast before him and cause the earth and them to that dwell upon the earth to worship the first beast. So he's standing next to them. Okay, and it talks about this deadly wound that's been healed. Okay, the Antichrist is a dead Gog, destroyed, buried, risen, brought back to life as Satan is thrown from heaven on the fifth trumpet, gets the key to the bottomless pit, and opens up the abyss and brings forth an abominable branch, as it indicates in Isaiah 14. He will force them on the earth through miracles to exalt the other beast. And it clearly tells you that if you follow this, you will be condemned and blotted out of the book of life. So this is extremely important that you understand what's going on here. Now there is a passage here in verse 15 which is a little confusing to understand, and I've tried to make a little bit of sense out of this. It talks about how he gives power unto the image of the beast. Okay, so we don't know exactly what the image of the beast is. It could be possibly, some people are thinking, a hologram. So think about this. In the end days, you would have not only an antichrist, a false prophet, but a hologramical image that would be placed on the TV or the system so that you can actually interact with this thing somehow. Okay? And it's just a guess how this works. We don't really know because we're just speculating at this point. So we don't know if possibly there could be a hologramic image that could rise. Antichrist and the false prophet may use this thing. It indicates that he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Okay, so if you do not follow the image of the beast or the beast in general or the teachings of the false prophet, you will basically be executed. It tells you this clearly, that it causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive the mark in their right hand and of their foreheads. Now there's two options here. He literally marks you somehow. If you go look at the jihadis, they wear their headbands, so that might be an option there. They may tattoo themselves or something like that, or they may find, as some think, we will be chipped so that we can be not only accounted for in the end days so they can track us, but if you take that chip, then at that point, you've lost your soul, because it clearly tells you that if you take this mark, uh, your name will be blotted out of the book of life forever. And so this is extremely important. And in 17, it says something extremely important. No man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of the name. So I have a couple things to say here about this. You need to get your oil in your lamp, as it indicates here, or you will not make it to the end without having to take the mark. And then you will lose your soul forever, which is what I've been warning you the whole time I've been out here. Other than you need to believe in the Lord Jesus, which is the only open door to get to the end of this equation. My problem with what I'm seeing here is Trump is disrupting the global world on multiple levels. And not to say that anything would happen to him. It's possible that something could happen to him where he could be eliminated, assassinated, as they've tried to do in the past. And I'm not hoping for that, because we need a good leader going into the end. But you also have to think about, if he creates so much disruption in the next year, we could see a blue wave take over Washington that would then nullify a lot of his powers, and would then the Democrats, and in their infinite wisdom, once the beast system comes out, apply us into the beast system and veto or override Trump's vetoes, and push us into a system that no one wants to be in except for the wicked. Okay, so this is extremely important. We need to watch how this happens. You know, they're going to tear Trump down as much as possible to make and diminish him, even though he's doing a lot of things to cut back bloat and waste and all these things in the systems, which then eliminates a lot of these programs and things that they make massive money off of in these Senate and congressional bodies, because they're doing insider trading and all these other different things, and they know what's coming up before you even get there. So these things do matter to us. But in this last verse, I think this is extremely important, and I don't know why nobody brings this up. So they always link 666, or the number of man, to the Antichrist. I think this is a total misunderstanding of biblical scripture, because when you go to the top, he's talking about the beast of the sea, which is the Antichrist, and then he ends this section in verse 10 and then goes to the beast of the earth, which is the false prophet, the false prophet. This is extremely important, because this is attached, this number of 666 is not attached to the Antichrist. It's not attached to the first portion of Revelation 13. It's attached to the bottom, or the second beast, which is the false prophet. Then the question is, and I brought this up before, so is the Antichrist a resurrectional being because he dies in or is broken or destroyed in Daniel 8 and then rises in an Antichrist as we move forward, as to where when you get into the bottom half of Revelation 13, it talks about the beast of the earth being a lamb, a religious leader that has the name of, or the number of 666, or the number of a man. Okay, so the question came up and has come up is Pope Francis the false prophet? Since he at that time, before he just died, he was alive, and so then would he make it through the next year to become impregnated with powers from Satan as he's thrown down, and then exalt the other beast, Antichrist, as he stands before him? I've thought for some time that the false prophet is the Pope, and he would be impregnated by Satan to exalt the Antichrist, which is a supernatural being that's risen out of the grave into an Antichrist figure. So is this pick of Pope extremely important as we move forward? Yes, it is extremely important that we understand what's getting ready to happen here, because we're getting ready to move into my paradigm into an Antichrist figure that pops up around March of 2026 based on everything that I've shown you on that chart. So this is extremely important. But who might be this false prophet that's moving forward in time? And I'm not saying it is, I'm not dogmatic like that. But it does seem to line up that this is a religious leader that would come out of the papacy or Rome. And we have a candidate that is a Roman here that sort of links us to a potential prophecy of Malachy. So when you get into the prophecy of the popes and Malachy's prophecy, a lot of people short him on this because they talk about, and I've done this myself, so I just want you to realize that when you go deeper into the prophecy of Malachi, you'll realize that there's more to it than these 112 popes that they're talking about. Okay? In reality, he predicted the reign of 267 popes, being the last one as Peter the Roman. Okay? Now, Pope Francis was not Peter the Roman, and actually in reality Pope Francis was the 266th Pope, moving us into the last Pope stage, which is the 267th Pope named Peter the Roman. The prophecy is interpreted by some as indicating that Peter the Roman will be the last pope presiding over the time of great tribulation and culminating in the destruction of Rome. The final verse of the prophecy translated into English reads, "In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will pasture his sheep in many tribulations, and when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and a dreadful judge will judge his people." The end. Wow, is that extreme, horrific, and brutal to the Catholic Church? Because you're following a false teacher, a false religion in a lot of ways. Look, I'm not trying to get down on the Catholics, but you got to go look at the Catholics and look at all the pagan symbolization in their methodology. He's even buried today in a pagan hat. Okay? Go look. I'm not going to go into this because it goes into too much. This video will be so much longer than it should be. But when you go look at the symbolization of the Catholic Church, and it radiates paganism all over the place. And I'm not trying to demean this religion. I'm just saying that they should really pay attention to things more. So we need to look at this last pope extremely closely. It indicates while the prophecy of the popes is widely debated, some interpret it as a meaning that the 267 pope will usher in the end of the world. Others believe it refers to the last pope who will give great challenges before the end of times. The prophecy is considered to be a source of both hope and fear depending on the interpretation. This prophecy is also associated with the idea of apocalypse. Okay, that you can look at in the 6th trumpet. Okay, because that's the apocalyptic war at the end, right as we get to the 7th trumpet and the Lord comes back, and then he eliminates all the wicked on the ground, because we're not here appointed for the wicked period of the bowls. So we're not here for the bowl phase. We're taken up on the 7th trumpet. When you get to the 6th trumpet, moving into the 7th trumpet, you're talking about the war of Armageddon, okay? And how that would then allow Antichrist, Satan, and the false prophet to have their frogs expelled from their mouths and then exorcised out of them. And then what does he do? He throws the false prophet and the Antichrist in the lake of fire, and he binds Satan for 1,000 years as we move into the millennial phase. Some believing and predict that the end of the world will be after the reign of the last pope. I believe that this new pope will be the last pope and that he will usher in this apocalyptic era that we're getting ready to go into. So when you go into the Jewish calendars, and history, we believe, based on everything we know, that Jesus died on Nisan 14, which was on a Wednesday in the year 30 AD. Now, the reason he died on a Wednesday, and so he was crucified at 9 in the morning when they had Passover, and they were slaughtering the sacrificial lambs for the cleansing on the Temple Mount. This was on the very same day. He was crucified at 9 in the morning. He dies at 3 p.m., and then they have him removed from the cross, laid in the tomb, and then he's there for 3 days, and then he rises on a Sabbath, which would be Saturday. Mary, which was supposed to anoint him on the Sabbath, went there to do that, and she found that the stone had been removed and he had risen, and so she could not perform that sacrificial process that she was required to do to finish the ceremony of burial. So when you get into the biblical world, you cannot use the Gregorian calendars, and this is why. So if Jesus died on Nisan 14, as stated in Leviticus 23, we need to understand that the Gregorian calendars are a little off, because you have Palm Sunday on the 13th after he dies. Then you have Good Friday on the 18th after he dies, and Easter on the 20th, week or so after he dies on the biblical calendars. So this is why I don't use, I don't use the Gregorian calendars in the biblical sense, and I also don't celebrate Easter because it's totally against the time when Jesus actually perished. And, it's sort of a snub to Jesus and God and himself when you're practicing his death when actually it was on a different day. So I think that's extremely important that we get on God's calendar and not our calendar. So it's just extremely important that we look at this a little differently sometimes. Jesus perished on Nisan 14 and 30 AD. Once you go past that and you get into the Gregorian calendar, it gets really pretty ugly. But that's not what I wanted to make this about. So if he dies on the 12th, and then the Pope dies on the 21st, there's a 9-day gap between that period of time. And so what does the number 9 mean in the biblical sense? There is a lot of meanings to the number 9 and how it affects us in the Bible and to significant events that happen biblically. If you look at this article, the number 9 is used approximately 50 times in the Old and New Testament. It still holds immense significance, often representing the time of judgment, or possibly completion, or even abundance, depending on how it's used. In this comprehensive guide, we're going to go over a number of symbolizations that reflect the number 9 and how it appears in the holy text itself. So it's interesting that in the Bible, many of God's judgments occur on the 9th hour, day, or year, including Jesus' death and destruction of Jerusalem's temples. Like I said, he was crucified at 9 in the morning, or the 9th hour. 9 also means completion, like the end of a 9-year cycle that was in Leviticus, or in other cases it represents fruitless or spiritual gifts like 9 fruits of the Spirit. 9 also represents God's judgment. The symbolization is shown in association with events like the fall of Jerusalem on the 9th year of Hosea reign. You had the 9 lepers who ignored Jesus' miracle, and the annual Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, also starts on the 9th day going into the 10th day, because you have the 10 days of awe, and then you have the Day of Atonement. Okay, so you've got to look at these things as you move into this. So he dies on the Day of Atonement. The Pope possibly dies on the Day of Atonement, signaling that we're getting ready to go into this last period of time. The number 9 also represents completion or finality. So you have the finality of this last pope, the 266th pope, moving into the last pope possibly, or the false prophet. And so that's extremely important. It symbolizes a complete grouping or final number in a series. In Leviticus, God describes a 9-year cycle that farmers should follow to manage their fields in the Promised Land. The Bible also says that Noah was the 9th generation after Adam, and there were 9 generations between Noah and Abraham, creating a sense of finality in the lineage of the Hebrew people. The number 9 is also associated with spiritual gifts from God. In 1 Corinthians, Paul writes that the fruit of the spiritual has 9 attributes, and there are also 9 gifts given to early Christians by the Holy Spirit. Another example, the Roman Cornelius had a vision on the 9th hour of the day, which ultimately led to the gospel being brought to the Gentile people. And now we get into that period of Constantine, where he then converts it. He's into Christianity, but look, he builds his own calendars because he's trying to offset the pagan system that he's in with the Christian nation that's trying to get him to follow him, and he perverts it. Okay, so it's extremely important. Jesus also died in the 9th hour of the day. Okay, so I may have stated this wrong earlier. I want to make sure. He crucified at 9 in the morning. He dies at 3 in the afternoon. They pull him down because they have to have him in the tomb before it becomes dark. Okay, it's required. So even an event that symbolizes God's judgment, the completion of his life, and final forgiveness of sins, and spiritual gift from God. And so all these things are extremely important, in my opinion. It reflects what's happening right now. Appearances of 9 in the Bible. This is extremely important, I think. And I'd mentioned this earlier. The 9th day is the Day of Atonement. It begins on the 9th day of the 7th month. The Day of the Atonement spans from the evening to evening, so the majority of the holy day is celebrated on the 10th day of the 7th month of the Hebrew calendar of Tishri. There's 2 calendars. Okay, there's the one that starts in Nisan. There's another one that starts in Tishri. It's broken into 2 different reasons. One's more civil, one's more prophetic. And so we need to understand these things. But the observance begins on the 9th day of sundown. On this Day of Atonement, priests usually hold holy rituals and sacrifices to atone for their sins of the Israelites. And I think it's interesting that the Pope dies on the 9th day of atonement. So maybe he's atoning for some of his bad communist Jesuits type teachings he brought of inclusion and other things to the church, which has perverted the church into a situation to where they are literally people are separating from them because it is not in tradition and to the original teachings of the church. It has been perverted. Leviticus 23:32 states, from the evening of the 9th day of the month until the following evening, you are to observe your Sabbath. And that's what I said. When he dies on Wednesday, they put him in the tomb for 3 days, and then he rises. And then Mary goes to the tomb to anoint him with oil, as she's supposed to, and he's not there. So he's risen at that moment in time. It's extremely important that we understand these things. The Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, is still observed to the Jewish people today because it was that important. We had Hosea rule for 9 years, but I'm just saying, you can look at all these different things in the book that lead us to understand that this ninth day after Jesus' death on 14 Nisan, when the Pope dies, could be actually prophetic in a lot of different ways. And you can read up on these things and determine whether you believe that some of these things actually do affect what is getting ready to happen out here as we move forward in the next 4.5 years. Now, I'll give you the number count today because I think this is extremely important. So as you move into this evening, we're at April 24th going into the 25th, so we're actually moving into the 25th of April. You're at 1600 days to the Feast of Trumpets of 2029, September 10th. This is extremely important because once you start breaking these 100-day marks from 1600 to 1500 to 1400, whatever, as we move forward, you're going to start to see this accelerate. You're in a year right now between March 14th of 2025 and March 4th of 2026, 3 blood moons with 3 solar eclipses, and look at the acceleration of everything that's been happening since March 14th of this year in the Middle East and around the world. Things are going to break. Okay, so you need to understand you're crossing these demarcations that are going to matter to you, and you're going to watch things accelerate as you move forward. So all these things matter to you as you get into these different understandings. And I'm showing you these different connections because I do believe that all of these things matter to you, and God is giving you a very clear timeline as you move forward. So if you take that 1260 days of Antichrist being on the ground from March 30th of 2026 to the Feast of Trumpets of 2029, September 10th, that's 1260-day gap of time. You're at 1600 days right now. You tell me how many days you got left before Antichrist gets on the ground. It's in less than a year. I'll put it that way. But I do believe that the 9th day after Jesus' death was significant. And also the Pope dies on Easter, on a pagan holiday, on the morning of that Monday after. And so I think this is all fairly significant in understanding that God is trying to tell us something here. That's extremely, extremely important that you know where you are in time. So anyway, I want you to realize that, numerology is important in the Bible. The number 9 is an extremely important number in the Bible, and that it might affect the timing of the death of the Pope. That's all I'm sort of trying to point out there, I guess. So Malachi indicates the 266 Pope prior to the last one, Peter the Roman. Now remember that name. Peter the Roman is the 267th Pope, which is getting ready to enter into this story, okay? But the 266th Pope was Pope Francis, okay? And he dies at age 88, which might have another whole bunch of symbology and numerology to it that I'm not going to get into right this moment in time because it would take way too much time to get into this if that was the case. So the question arises, who might be the next Pope? And would he be a Roman, or would he come from Rome? And how would that affect Malachi's prophecy? There is a person out here right now that's actually been elevated to a position that has a extreme high probability that he will be the next Pope. And he comes out of the Vatican in Italy. Now, I'm not going to be dogmatic and state that I know that this is the next pope, but there is a high probability that this person, and I probably can't even say his name properly, will be Peter the Roman. Okay. There are several Italian cardinals that could be considered potential candidates for the new pope. One is this Cardinal Pietro, possibly Peter the Roman, Parolin. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. The Pope really liked this guy a lot. Pope Francis really liked this guy. He has served as a Vatican secretary since 2014, and I believe that he is, based on his name, his position, and his potential for being the next pope, possibly will be the next pope, okay? And if so, possibly that would make him the false prophet. He's considered a moderate and a continuity candidate, which means that basically he holds a lot of Pope Francis's understandings, beliefs, and things close to his heart, and so that's going to be his mantra as he moves forward, is inclusion. Pope Francis was big on environmental, green, justice, things like that. So this guy could even be more radical than even Pope Francis was in his stances of inclusion, as well as green, or when you get into the global warming phenomenon, which is, in my opinion, fake. It's all secular. Go look at the time of history of the world and see how it's changed over time, and this is just another cycle that we're in, and these cycles continuously happen throughout the thousands of years that we've been on this planet. And so they can, it's amazing. You can go out and look at the science of global warming, and they cut out everything that really matters to make their case, so then they can apply massive billions and trillions of dollars of money into organizations and things that they are basically building, and so they benefit from all this, and none of this very much benefits you, but we won't get into that. So this guy holds a lot of Pope Francis's original teachings, and I think he is going to play a massive role as we go into this. Now, the question is, because of inclusion of the church into all these other different groups and stuff, would he then somehow put us into conversion into Islam? That is something we'll have to see how that plays out. If this guy thinks that the first one that comes down that he warns us about is not Jesus, as Antichrist, and he's misled and thinks that he's the one, he may make you follow him. I'm just sort of throwing that down there. But could this Peter the Roman possibly be this false prophet as we move forward? So I do not know exactly for sure what's going to happen. We're going to find out in a few weeks, because usually once the Pope dies, they pick another one in 15 days. If there's a fairly high consensus, and it does seem to be that this guy is on the high percentages of possibilities that this will be your next Pope, and that this might follow Malachy's prophecy of the 267th Pope, which would take you into tribulation. I'm not trying to be dogmatic. None of this may happen at all, but there is a high possibility it could. I also want you to realize that this potential false prophet is going to lead you to potentially exalt the next beast, which is Antichrist, if you do not know what's getting ready to happen. God and the prophets, Jesus told you many, many times, if you go back and look, why will you perish? because of lack of knowledge. You won't understand because you're not in the book. You don't read it. You don't follow his laws, his rules, his Torah, anything. You're not even on the right calendar with him. You're 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 celebrating his death many days after he's already perished. To me, that's a slap in the face to God and his son when we do these types of things. So I do not know exactly what's getting ready to happen, but I do believe that something big is getting ready to happen as you cross the 1600-day threshold here into the end of this Shemitah cycle. You also have this young generation of the Jews perishing. The 80th year of the nation of the Jews ends on May 14, 2028. Look, if you cannot see the connections, then you probably don't have the seal of God, and I feel for you because that probably means you're going to be in a place you don't want to be. So, as it states, get your oil ready because this is going to get extreme and it is going to amplify and it's going to accelerate as you move into this next year. But as you move into the next 4.5 years or 1600 days, as you get into the Feast of Trumpets of 2029, this is going to be a horrific nightmare on the ground until we're removed from here, okay? So do what you need to do to protect yourselves. He's warned you and told you what you should be doing. And if you have not done anything now, it's going to be a problem as you move forward because we're already starting to see what I just talked about in a number of videos. As we go to a trade war with China, major companies are coming out talking about how they're going to have shortages on the shelves here soon because they already stopped pushing containers over here a month ago because of the tariffs, okay? So they have over excess to a certain point, and then they're going to run out of stuff, and then they're going to just be filling the shelves with whatever they can throw on there because they want to make you think they still have products on the shelves, but there won't be anything you care about. And if it is on there and you do care about it, it's going to be a whole lot more. So you need to probably think about getting your stuff in the next few weeks. And as you cross the 1600-day threshold, you really need to possibly seriously be thinking about shoring yourself up, especially with stuff that you're constantly using up. If you're using stuff up in the next, 3-6 months, you probably, it's perishable, but it's longer term storage, another thing, I don't want to bring this up real quick. If you have young children, things like that, you might want to go out and get like your medicines, cold medicines, things like that for the children, things like that. Ibuprofen. Most of the medicines are made in China. And so a lot of these things aren't going to be there. If you have your own problems medically, you may have to either purchase them in advance or you may have to go to a holistic method to offset when you don't actually have the pills or the chemicals to fix your problem anymore because the system's broken. You may have to find natural alternatives. So all these things need to be brought up in advance before you get there so that you can figure out how to deal with them. And yes, some things can't be dealt with. If you're on insulin and other things, you just could be out of luck. And you need to think about some of this. Is there a way around it? Is there a way to, help yourself without being on that specific medication, or are you just in a really bad place? So these things need to be brought up, and don't just put them off till the last moment, and then you're just not going to be able to do anything about it. So I think it's extremely important that we look at all these different things as we move forward, and it's amazing how it fits basically perfectly into the charting that I've given you. I've updated these charts. I just did a video yesterday about the updating of the charts. Talked about how Erdogan's getting ready to advance into Lebanon. That's getting ready to break out. And how the Pope just perished and how that applied to the Paradigm 2030 chart and how that affects you today. So you need to go out, you need to understand these things, and it's extremely important that you get right with the Son of God, Jesus, and do what you need to protect your families as we move forward. God bless.